You've had a chance to practice multiplying just with decimals. We need to continue practicing that, but I'm going to layer in another bit of understanding that fifth graders in the United States are supposed to learn, and that is how to find volume. One of the reasons I'm pretty sure that they require fifth graders to learn how to find volume is because it uses multiplication. So a shortcut, anytime you are asked to find the volume of a figure, it will be geometry, and volume measures three-dimensional. So it wants to know how many cubes fit inside a given figure. Fifth graders only have to worry about figuring out how many cubes fit inside of a rectangular prism. So that's not too bad to deal with because, remember I said the shortcut is you multiply your numbers. The first thing I want to do though is talk about why you might multiply the numbers in order to find the volume of a prism if it is a rectangle. So volume is asking how many cubes can fit inside a rectangle. So in order to find that out, you have to stop and think. In fourth grade, you had to learn area. Area is how many flat rectangles, so we'll take away that cube, how many flat rectangles fit on the bottom of a rectangular shape. I can't call it a prism. It's not a prism until it's three-dimensional. So this is the base. And what you were supposed to learn in fourth grade is, oh, it's really easy to find how many rectangles there are. I just take the length, 1, 2, 3, 4, times the width. Here it calls it the depth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 times 5 gives me 20. This is a fun thing, and yes, you'll get to play with it again on your own, but right now I'm just showing you. In order to prove to you that this area of the bottom is 20, look I put 4 cubes on it already. Now I've got 12 cubes on there. It's supposed to take 20 total. Well, I have 2 rows left, and there are 4 in each row, so that should be 8 cubes and take me up to 20 for my total, oopsies, get rid of that one, my total area of the bottom. Indeed, it took 20 cubes to cover that up. So if I know it takes 20 cubes to cover that bottom layer, can you see that I will take my 20 cubes 2 more times? I already have 20 once, but it'll take another layer of 20 cubes and another layer of 20 cubes to fill this up. What if I take away one of those layers? See how this rectangular prism is not full? But when I put that layer back on, now I know I have 20 cubes on the bottom layer, another 20 cubes on the second layer, and another 20 cubes on the third layer. So I'm going to take the number of cubes that it took me for the bottom layer, which was 20. I'll take those 20 cubes 3 times. How many cubes did it take me to fill up the rectangular prism? Well, hopefully you saw that it took me, oops, not 30 cubes, it took me 20 cubes 3 times, which is 2 times 3 is 6, plus a 0 gives me 60. And I can check it to be sure, and it tells me that I am correct. Now, there are a couple of things that you can do with this because I am going to, as part of today's assignments, I am going to ask you to come to this website. It's your third box down. I'll ask you to come to this website and just play around with this idea. So I want to show you a few other things that you can do to play. You can clear it off. You can absolutely change the size of the rectangular prism and find the different volumes. I don't want you to mess with surface area because it's difficult enough to make sure you understand volume. You can change the width. Now it is 5 by 5, and it's still going to take 3 layers. You can change the depth. Now it is 5 by 6, and you still have 3 layers that it will take to fill this. You can make it a different height. So now it's 5 by 6, and it will take 1, 2, 3, 4 layers to fill up this rectangular prism. So I want you to mess around with changing the width, the depth, and the height. Sometimes that's also called the length times width times height. I want you to mess around with changing those. Prove to yourself that, yep, once I find how many cubes are in this bottom layer, and you could do it a cube at a time to check your math. Once you find out how many cubes it takes to fill the bottom layer, I just take that many cubes, however many times it is high. So I want you to really get a feeling of why with volume you are multiplying. You are taking the length times the width times the height. So mess around with this. You can make the width and the depth and the height as small as 1 by 1 by 1. And hopefully you would be able to see that the volume there, it's only going to take 1 cube. You can make this quite large as well, all the way up to 20. And it really can show you some very different shapes. So part of your assignment is to play with this, making yourself more familiar with what volume is. Your graded assignment, though, is going to be to go with the idea that when you are finding volume, that means you are dealing with multiplication. And even though this is asking you to find volume, it's not showing you the individual cubes like this one did. Let's get this back to something reasonable. Actually, let's get it even smaller. Okay, there we go. So even though it doesn't show you where the cubes would go, it took away those inside lines, it is telling you the measurements. So in order to find a volume, you will measure, this is the length, this is the width, and this is the height. And so you would take these 3 measurements and multiply them, and this we are going to use to practice decimal multiplication. So here we go. You're going to have to pause this occasionally to do some of the work and then resume it so that you can check. This first one, length times width, 7 4/10 times 3 7/10. Pause and do the multiplication. I am going to show you that answer. Check yourself if you did not get these, especially this placeholder. You should be remembering to put the placeholder. Once you move one place larger, you always put the 0 to hold your place. When you added, you got 2738, 2,738, except decimals. This is where you go back. There were 2 decimals in the problem, 1, 2. So you must doink the decimal to make your answer not a whole number because we're taking pieces. So we need some pieces in the answer. Once you have that, we have taken length times width. That tells us how many boxes, how many cubes on the bottom layer. But now we need to put the layers on top of each other. So we take our 27 and 38/100ths. You decide what to do with it. All right, now I'm going to show you. You would take 27 and 38/100ths times the height, 7 and 3/10ths. It does not matter that the decimals are not lined up because we are multiplying. We're not adding, we're not subtracting, we don't line them up. Your first row, when you multiply everything times the 3, should have come out to this. Your second row, when you multiply everything times the 7, should have come out to this. Then when you add, you should get this. But is this your final answer? So be careful. There's two things now we need to look for: decimals and the label. Because this is volume, we will also need a label. What are we measuring? So first of all, 1, 2, 3 places to doink the decimal. Start as if it's a whole number, but make it smaller. So our answer is 199 and 874 thousandths. But then we need to label. These are inches, but it's three-dimensional. It's like it would pop out. So since it's three-dimensional, we need to label it as a cube. A flying 3 means you're talking with 3 dimensions. You're talking about the cubes, not the flat squares just on the bottom. So this would be the answer. We're going to do another practice one, and then you will need to do 2 problems on your own as the assignment. Here's the other practice one. So we have the length down here, we have the width up here, and we have the height along here. It gives us those measurements. Now, in multiplication, it does not matter the order that you multiply things. So you could just say 6.3 times 7.6 and that answer times 6.1. However, I am trying to train you to think volume is length times width times height. It will very often be written V equals L times W times H. Length times width times height. Anytime you are asked for volume, you know there will be multiplication involved. So with me, you are going to take the length times the width first of all. So write it down. And this is what it should look like. Now, pause to get your answer. And resume. I am going to show you the answer to the multiplication. When you multiplied times 3, it should have come out like this. When you moved over, you should have put a placeholder. Should come out like this. And then the rest of your answer, multiplying times the 6. When you add those up, you get 3843, but you are not done. What about the decimals and the label? We don't worry about the label until the end. Although if we got a label, it would only be meters square, because so far we have just figured out how many squares it would take to get the area of the bottom. Since we're not labeling it, since we're going for volume, we will count the decimals and say 38 and 43 hundredths. That is the area, 38 and 43. I will label it here just to show you, square meters. But now I need to take that layer and stack it up, 7 and 6/10ths of a meter. You set it up. Here's what it should look like so far. So the decimals in 3843 are right here. That was the area of the bottom. You don't line up decimals when you multiply. You just line up numbers. So 2 numbers underneath the smallest 2 spaces here. multiply everything through. When you multiply times the 6, you should have gotten this answer. Then when you multiplied through times the 7, you should have remembered the placeholder. And this one, you can see I messed up a little bit when I carried things, so be careful. These are kind of large numbers. Don't forget to add whatever you carry. The final answer came out like this, except I can't stop. Why? I ignore decimals when I'm setting up multiplication, but I must put them back in when I'm done. You put the decimals in, pause this to get the decimal in, and see if you can get the label right too. Decimal and the label in your final answer. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So your final answer should be 292 and 68 thousandths. What will the label be? Well, it's not just straight line meters. It's not flat square meters. It's going to be three-dimensional meters. We're putting cubes inside. Your homework assignment then is to find the area of these two. If you got the papers, you can do it on paper. If you did not pick up your papers yet or this week, that is perfectly fine. You can see they appear right here in today's schedule with assignments. You do need to show all the work, and you do need to have them correctly labeled. So after you do all the work to find them, ask yourself 2 more questions. Where are the decimals? And what should my label be? So I would like to see work like this. The first multiplication, the second multiplication, show me